Let's jump right into the mind of a mobster. Today, in this explainer, we're deconstructing Al Capone. We aren't going to look at the Hollywood myths or the hearsay. Instead, we're diving directly into the psychological profile of America's most notorious public enemy, using absolutely nothing but his own words. We're going to look at his exact quotes to see exactly how a man who built an empire on crime actually processed the world around him.
Okay, let's start with arguably his most famous statement. You can get much further with a kind word and a gun than with a kind word alone. This perfectly sets up the central contradiction of the guy. He wasn't just a mindless brute, and he wasn't just some silver-tongued charmer. He believed in the absolute necessity of combining polite negotiation with the unspoken, lethal threat of force. It's a chillingly practical view of power dynamics that, honestly, you sometimes see mirrored in modern cutthroat environments, just with a little less gunpowder.
Which brings us to the core question we really need to answer today. How exactly does a public enemy justify his empire? How does someone wake up every single day, oversee this massive syndicate of illegal and often violent activities, and still look themselves in the mirror? As we systematically break down his mindset, keep this question in the back of your head. We're going to see exactly how he rationalized it all.
Section 1. Violence in Negotiation.
He once bluntly stated, "A bullet changes a lot in your head, even if it hits in the ass." Yeah, it's pretty crude, but it absolutely highlights his brutal pragmatism. He had this fundamental understanding of the undeniable leverage of physical force. To Capone, violence wasn't about anger or a loss of control. It was just a super effective communication tool to guarantee the immediate compliance of whoever he was dealing with. And then there is the ultimate mafia cliché. Nothing personal, it's just business. But the thing is, Capone literally lived this. Notice the sheer detachment here. By classifying his actions as just business, he famously detached all human emotion, empathy, or moral hesitation from his violent acts. He didn't see himself as a murderer. He was just making necessary corporate transactions. It's the absolute extreme of compartmentalizing your work life from your personal morality. But then, we hit this incredibly surprising twist that completely contrasts his brutal reputation. He said, "I will give 36 of my thugs for one person who can solve questions by talking." So despite the guns and the violence, he actually placed a way higher premium on skilled negotiation. Muscle is cheap, right? But intelligence and persuasion, that's rare. He totally understood that brute force is messy, whereas a really good talker can secure an empire quietly.
Section 2. The Legitimate Racket.
Let's unpack this fascinating rationalization, because he totally flips the script here. He boldly shifts the blame entirely away from himself and right onto the public. He's basically arguing that he's merely fulfilling a market need, an insatiable public demand for alcohol during Prohibition. In his mind, the supplier is morally neutral. It's the consumers driving the machine who bear the true guilt. And that leads directly to his ultimate rhetorical defense. Why should I be called a public enemy? He claimed he was simply organizing the booze that the country explicitly asked for. He viewed himself almost as a public servant. In his logic, if the public demands a service, how can they turn around and declare the supplier an enemy? This is brilliantly illustrated by his personal definition of capitalism: the legitimate racket of the ruling class. Now, stepping back for a second, look at how he breaks down society through this deeply cynical lens. He believed the entire system was corrupt anyway, and that legal businesses were just rackets protected by the government. By defining capitalism this way, he completely legitimized his own operations. He was just doing exactly what the ruling class did, merely without their legal protections. Section 3. Religion, Morality, and Guilt. Let's look at how his mind processed morality and faith. He said, "As a child, I prayed to God for a bicycle. Then I realized that God works differently." This sounds almost innocent at first, right? Like a gentle observation about unanswered prayers. But just wait to see how he takes matters into his own hands. His solution? "I stole my bike and prayed for forgiveness." I mean, that perfectly encapsulates his twisted moral logic. He manipulated the very concept of religious forgiveness to excuse his intentional transgressions. Why wait around for divine intervention when you can just take what you want and use the loophole of repentance later? It is a highly, highly transactional view of faith. He also held this deeply cynical view of religious institutions as a whole. He claimed, hell must be a pretty swell spot because the guys that invented religion have sure been trying hard to keep everybody else out. He fundamentally believed that the moral systems of the world were inherently hypocritical. He viewed religious leaders with the exact same suspicion he viewed politicians, just gatekeepers trying to control the masses. And, by tearing down the moral authority of others, he made plenty of room for his own lack of morals. Yet, despite all this swagger, he harbored a massive victim complex, complaining, "All the dead were hanged on me with the exception of the victims of World War II." He genuinely believed he was the scapegoat for every crime imaginable. And this is particularly wild because he's also quoted as believing that everything you do comes back to you. He clearly understood the concept of karma, but still felt entirely victimized by his reputation. And then there's this chilling quote, "Can you forgive an enemy? God will forgive. Our task is to arrange their meeting." It's a morbid joke for sure, but it perfectly captures his unique blend of religious rhetoric and absolute ruthlessness. He completely absolves himself of the burden of forgiveness, leaving that to a higher power, while taking on the role of the executioner. He is literally playing God with his enemies' lives. Section 4. Strategy, Trust, and Patience. Away from the violence, Capone was an incredibly shrewd manager. He famously said he would rather have 4 quarters than 100 pennies. This was his core philosophy on trust, quality over quantity, literally. He urged extreme care in who you call friends. Being sociable with many is fine, but you must be a friend to the few. Valuing a few highly reliable, close allies over a multitude of loose acquaintances was an absolute survival mechanism. Because the paranoia was intense, he said, "If your friends ask you to negotiate with your enemy, the traitors have already agreed behind your back." He lived in a world where betrayal was fatal. He also maintained a strict rule about risk, believing that if you play it safe, you will definitely lose. Calculated aggression, combined with deep suspicion of even your own inner circle, was just his baseline. Let's rapid fire through some of Capone's daily rules for strategy. First, do not shake the green apple tree. Basically, wait until the apple is ripe and falls by itself. That is all about impeccable timing. Next, don't test the depth of the river with both feet. Classic risk management, always leave it out. Then, work out problems as they come up, meaning stay adaptable. If you must lie, be brief, because over-explaining creates traps. And finally, listen to advantageous advice, but don't give it. Keep your edge hidden. Notice how eerily these mirror modern cutthroat corporate strategies. You could literally read these in a business boardroom today. And perhaps his greatest strategic asset was his incredible patience. Tolerate fools to learn something worthwhile, but never argue with them. He firmly believed that the world belongs to the patient. Arguing with a fool is just a total waste of energy, and it reveals your own hand. But enduring them silently, that might just yield a really valuable piece of information. So, looking back at all of his own words, does the mind of a mobster ultimately just mirror the mind of a ruthless businessman? We've seen how he rationalized his actions through basic supply and demand, utilized brutal risk management, valued close allies, and treated violence as just another corporate tool. It really leaves us pondering the chilling logic of his legacy and just how fine the line can sometimes be between the legitimate racket and the illegitimate one. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this dive into his psychology gave you a completely new perspective. Keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next one.